910 here, Big 550 KTRS. Our next guest is somebody you are going to want to listen to when talking about Ferguson and Officer Wilson and Michael Brown and what's going on with the immunity courts and all of that. Everyone's had an opinion. Everyone's been heard. However, not too many African-American police officers have stood up and told us what they thought. Our next guest is exactly that. He's a former St. Louis City police officer. He happens to be African-American. His name is Terrell Carter, and he's written a book called Walking the Blue Line. A police officer turned community activist provides solutions to the racial divide. Terrell Carter, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Thank you for having me.
We should say that we're now broadcasting on KPLR channel 11.2, which is channel 187 on your Charter communication system. And if you have an HD antenna, that's 11.2. We're also at stltoday.com. Go to the opinion tab, ktrs.com. Don't forget to download our app when you're not near a radio. It's a great app, one radio station, one app, KTRS app. Just search your app store. And, of course, on the Big 550 KTRS. All right, Terrell Carter, you were born and raised in St. Louis?
Yep, North St. Louis in the Ville.
And you became a police officer. You moved away to Texas for a little bit, is that right?
I did. I went to high school in Texas, but came back to St. Louis immediately afterwards.
Okay, and you became a police officer in the city of St. Louis when?
1997, I was 23 years old.
And you were a police officer for how long?
5 years.
5 years. Okay, you've now, since you have jobs here in St. Louis, raising a family, living in the community, being just like the rest of us.
Yep.
Okay.
Just living a normal life like everyone else.
Why did you, as an African American, want to become a police officer?
I did not want to become a police officer. I was at the time I was married and to my first wife, and we were going through a divorce, and she told me she was pregnant, and I was employed in the construction field at the time and wasn't making much money, didn't have any benefits. And I was raised in a household of faith. When I found out I was going to be a dad, I prayed for an opportunity to get a better job, to be able to take care of my child. And 2 days later, I heard an advertisement on the radio for the police department and literally just considered it. I had not had positive experiences with police prior to that. I only knew one person who was a police officer. He was a sergeant at the time who I had a positive relationship with. So I contacted that gentleman and just asked what he thought, and he convinced me that it would be a good opportunity for me and for my family.
Yeah. There have been, let's back up a second. Growing up in St. Louis, in the book, you speak of times where you were pulled over for walking while black, driving while black, just for no other reason than the color of your skin.
Yeah, I mean, I have a twin brother, and the day that we got back from Texas, we flew in. My grandparents, we lived with my grandparents when we got back. Grandparents picked us up from the airport, and we got back to their house, dropped our clothes off, walked outside to go across the street to go play basketball, and were stopped by a police officer immediately. And he said, "Hey, I just got through taking you to jail. Why are you already out?" And we're like, "Sir, we just flew in from Texas. You did not stop us or take us to jail." Mm-hmm. And my grandparents had to go out and help verify who we were and that we were not there. Another time that I mentioned in the book is I was working construction and we were at a job out in the county. It was on a Saturday, and I leave the work site in full, construction clothes with tools in my back seat, and I'm driving down the street. And a police officer passes me going the opposite direction. I drive down a hill and turn the corner, and he pulls me over. And I go, "Officer, why did you stop me?" He's like, "Because I want to know what you're doing in this neighborhood. You were speeding." And I said, "Officer, I saw you pass me. How did you know I was speeding?" "Well, I had my radar gun on you." "Well, how did you have your radar gun on me if I had turned the corner already and was out of your view?" He said, "Well, my radar gun can follow you anywhere it needs to go." So
it happens. It happens. It happens.
And I have more stories than just that.
Sure. Do you walk down the street when you were a kid and hear the door locks go?
No, not where we lived. I mean, the community where we grew up I can't say it was close knit, but people respected one another. The problem was not necessarily with neighbors. The problem was with the police that patrolled the neighborhood.
Right. White officers, black officers, neither, both?
Both. I mean, one of the ideas that I express in the book is that at its base, basis, police. It's essentially a police against everyone else kind of mentality that police officers have, and you're taught that in the academy, and that idea is strengthened when you're on the street. And then within that, you have levels of who gets treated whatever way by police officers, but predominantly it is a police versus everyone else mentality.
Even though you had some negative experiences with police officer, was that one positive experience with that sergeant enough to say that this might be a place for me to make a difference?
At that point, I was really just thinking about
what needed a job.
I needed a job. I hadn't finished college yet,
right.
And I mean, this is St. Louis. I knew that as a black male, my opportunities probably would not be as extensive as other places. And I also thought that if I could get on the department, I would have a plan. That my plan would be I would work 5 years and I would make a decision, because at 5 years you can be promoted to sergeant. But I also set the goal that I would have my undergraduate and my graduate degree finished in 5 years, and I quit 3 weeks to the 5-year date of me getting hired.
So once you got your degrees, then you quit, and that was the plan. 5 years, make a decision what you want to do.
Right, and that was influenced by a few other things that I mentioned in the book, but yes, that was the overall plan.
Walking the blue line, Terrell Carter, our guest, a St. Louis police officer. For what were the years you were a police officer?
From 97 to 2002.
97 to 2002, walking the blue line. When you were accepted into the academy, were you accepted by the rest of the police officers?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the academy, it's just a group of people who have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
It's almost like being in college. You go and you sit in a classroom for, essentially 8 hours a day, or you do other multiple things, but it's essentially like being in college for 8 hours a day. You attend classes, you work out, you go to the range, and you take firearm practice. You do defensive tactics. Again, you work out. You will mirror officers who are out on the street, whether as like helping direct traffic. So you try to learn as much as you can.
Once you became a police officer, were you accepted by the rest of the police community at large?
Yeah, I mean, because you come in with a clean slate. No one knows who you are. The anticipation is that, or the expectation is that you will come in and you will figure out a place for yourself, and you will do what needs to be done. What most police officers are, I would think, and what my experience was, that what most police officers are concerned about is, will you come in and will you help protect, one another? Will you help protect other police officers? Mm-hmm. And as long as you are willing to do that, then you will be accepted for the most part.
So they don't care about the color of your skin. They only want to make sure you're on the police officers team.
Right. Again, it's police officers against everyone else.
Yeah. We've heard from a number of police officers, African-American police officers, and we've seen some video of African-American police officers the last 6-8 months since the whole Ferguson thing happened, where they've gotten the brunt of the yelling, the screaming, right. the throwing. We've had sergeants and captains say, "Boy, the African American police officers are getting worse than anybody else out there." Is that true? Do you get heckled worse in the African American community?
It is, and I experienced that as well, especially when you are the only African American officer in a group of white officers dealing with a black crowd or a black community, because they essentially look at you as a sellout. It's the questions are, well, why are you doing this? Well, you're only acting this way because these white people are around. You know what it's like to be black and how police treat people. Why are you doing the same thing to us?
Right. It's almost like you can't win if the criticism is the police department doesn't look like the community in which they're policing, and yet there's a stigma towards African-American young people getting in to become police officers. How do you solve the problem?
I don't know exactly how you solve it. I mean, I don't think there's a stigma against black people becoming police officers. I think the stigma is when you become a police officer, will you do what has been done to you before? Will you do the things that has been done to the community before, or will you do something different? As a patrolman, which is just a police officer who rides around in a white car, mm-hmm. Your job is to answer radio calls. And unfortunately, you're not allowed a lot of flexibility in how you handle many calls. And so if you continue to see the same type of people on a daily basis, the same type of situations, you're probably going to react similarly every time. So there's not a lot of flexibility or creativity that officers are able to use as they deal with or as they interact with citizens. And so if you're doing the same thing that this white officer is doing, or if you're treating me the same way that this white officer is treating me, then I won't say it's a stigma again, but it's just an expectation that people begin to have with all police officers.
So it sounds to me like the public doesn't understand that if you come across somebody who's drunk in an alleyway and the white officer treats him one way, that's the way by the book you're supposed to treat the guy.
I won't even say that that's the way by the book that you're supposed to treat a person, but that's the way that the culture of policing treats that person.
And so that's the code.
Yes.
You have to do it the same way, or you break the police code, the blue line, if you will.
Well, and yes, that is one of the challenges, or that's one of the things that could happen, yes.
And so if you're doing it the way that the police do it, then you're selling out to the white police officers.
There you go, yes.
Yeah.
Or you're selling out to the system,
Yeah.
even bigger thing.
In your book, Walking the Blue Line, Terrell Carter, former St. Louis police officer for 5 years, it's an honest look at both what it's like to be an African-American police officer, and you've also talked about some of the times where the police did not do right by the people who they were policing.
Yes. My goal in writing the book, number one, I didn't start out with the idea of writing a book. I write for an international Christian ethics site, and when Mike Brown was shot, I began to write columns that said, hey, everybody, we need to stop because there's much more to this than any of us expect or will know. And the reason why I know this is because I'm an African American, I've been harassed by the police, but I'm also a former police officer, and so my goal was to try to get people to see that there's more to this than just your opinion. There are two sides to every story.
Right.
And so that's and part of telling that story was telling the good that police officers do, but also telling the not so good that police officers have done as well.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. Terrell Carter is our guest. The book is called Walking the Blue Line. Where can we get the book?
You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Locally, there's a bookstore in U-City, Subterranean Books, that has copies as well. You can also order it from my website, terrellcarter.net.
Walking the Blue Line, a police officer turned community activist provides solutions to the racial divide. We'll get to some of that here coming up in just